It started in a small apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with thin walls, a worn-out couch, and a desk pushed into the corner where Marcus spent most of his nights. At 26, Marcus was doing everything right, at least according to what society told him. He had a stable job in marketing, made around $60,000 a year, paid his bills on time, and followed what everyone calls smart money habits. He saved a little, avoided risky investments, and listened to the same advice repeated everywhere. Don't spend too much, build an emergency fund, contribute to your retirement, stay safe, stay consistent. And for a while, it felt like he was on the right path. There was no chaos, no financial crisis, no obvious mistakes. But there was something else, something harder to explain, a quiet frustration that kept growing in the background. Every month looked the same. Salary came in, bills went out, a small amount went into savings, and whatever was left disappeared into everyday life. Groceries, gas, subscriptions, small expenses that didn't seem like much individually, but added up quickly. And at the end of the month, Marcus would look at his account and realize nothing really changed. He wasn't going backwards, but he wasn't moving forward either. It felt like running on a treadmill, constant movement, no real progress. And the strangest part was, everyone around him was doing the exact same thing. His coworkers, his friends, even people older than him. Same routine, same mindset, same results. Nobody was struggling, but nobody was breaking out either. That's when the question started forming in his mind. What if the problem isn't execution? What if the problem is the advice itself? Because normal money advice is designed to keep you stable, not to make you free. It teaches you how to survive the system, not how to step outside of it. And once Marcus started thinking like that, everything he had accepted without question began to feel different. The idea of saving 10% of his income suddenly felt slow. The idea of waiting 40 years to enjoy life felt distant. The idea of playing it safe felt limiting.
He didn't make any sudden moves at first. He just started observing, watching how money actually worked in real life, not in theory. He noticed that the people who followed traditional advice perfectly were financially secure, but rarely financially independent. They had good credit scores, stable lives, predictable futures, but they were still tied to their jobs, still dependent on monthly income, still limited in their choices. And then there were others, people who didn't follow the rules as strictly. They took risks, they invested differently, they built side income, they thought beyond saving. And while their path looked less stable on the surface, their results looked very different over time. This is where the psychological shift begins, because once you question the system, you can't go back to blindly following it. Marcus started realizing that most financial advice is built around fear. Fear of losing money, fear of making mistakes, fear of uncertainty. So the system tells you to avoid risk, stay consistent, trust the process, and eventually you'll be okay. But okay started feeling like a trap, because okay means you survive, but you don't necessarily thrive. He looked at his own situation more honestly. Saving a few $100s a month wasn't going to change his life anytime soon. His job, while stable, had limits. His time was fixed. His income was capped by his position. No matter how disciplined he was, the system itself had a ceiling. And that realization hit differently, because it wasn't about working harder anymore. It was about thinking differently.
One night, while scrolling through his bank transactions, Marcus noticed something simple but powerful. Most of his money was going toward maintaining his current life, not building a future one. Rent, bills, food, small comforts. Necessary, yes, but not transformative. And that's when he understood something most people ignore. Stability without growth eventually feels like stagnation. That's the moment everything started changing, not externally, but internally. Marcus didn't quit his job or take extreme risks. He did something more important. He stopped blindly trusting normal advice. He started questioning it. Why save so much in cash when inflation eats it? Why avoid all risk when calculated risk is how wealth is built? Why rely on one income when multiple streams are clearly more powerful? These weren't rebellious thoughts, they were logical, but they went against what he had been told his entire life. And that's where most people hesitate, because stepping away from normal advice feels uncomfortable. It feels like you're doing something wrong, even when the logic makes sense. Society rewards conformity. It praises people who follow the system, not those who question it. So when Marcus started thinking differently, he didn't talk about it much. He just acted quietly. He began reallocating his money, not all at once, but gradually. Instead of putting everything into savings, he started learning about investing. Not blindly, not based on hype, but with intention. He accepted that there would be risk, but also understood that avoiding risk completely was its own kind of loss. He looked into building additional income streams, not because he hated his job, but because he didn't want to depend on it forever. And for the first time, money started feeling like a tool instead of a routine.
There was also a shift in how he viewed time. Normal advice tells you to sacrifice now for later. Work hard, save consistently, and enjoy life in your 60s. But Marcus started questioning that timeline. Why should freedom be delayed for decades? Why not build something that gives you options sooner? That question changed how he approached everything. Instead of thinking long-term in a passive way, he started thinking long-term in an active way. The changes were subtle at first. No dramatic results, no overnight success. But internally, something felt different. There was a sense of direction that didn't exist before. A feeling that he wasn't just maintaining his life, but actually shaping it. And that feeling is rare, because most people never step outside the cycle long enough to see it clearly. At this point, Marcus wasn't rich. He wasn't financially independent, but he was no longer stuck in the same mental loop. And that's the real starting point. Because before your money changes, your thinking has to. Before your results shift, your approach has to. If you're listening to this and it feels familiar, that quiet frustration, that sense of doing everything right but still feeling stuck, then you're probably closer to this realization than you think. And that's exactly why you need to pay attention to what comes next. If you want content that actually breaks down how money works in real life, not just theory, make sure you like, subscribe, and join Prime Gorilla. Because in the next part, things start getting real. Not just in mindset, but in action.
The shift didn't feel dramatic from the outside, but internally, it was massive. Marcus wasn't just questioning normal money advice anymore. He was actively moving away from it. And that's where things started getting uncomfortable, because thinking differently is easy when it stays in your head. But the moment you start acting on it, you separate yourself from what everyone else is doing, and that creates tension, not just financially, but socially and psychologically. At work, nothing had changed on the surface. Same office, same conversations, same routines. But the way Marcus saw everything around him was different now. He noticed how his coworkers talked about money, promotions, raises, bonuses, all tied to the same system. Everyone was focused on climbing a ladder that still ended with dependence. And once he saw it that way, it became hard to ignore, because even the people making more money were still stuck in the same cycle, just at a higher level. Bigger salaries, bigger expenses, bigger responsibilities, but not necessarily more freedom. That's when Marcus made his first real move. He stopped treating his job as his only source of growth. Before, his entire financial plan depended on that one paycheck. Now, he started seeing it as just one part of a bigger system he needed to build. And that shift alone changed how he approached his time. Instead of coming home and relaxing every night, he started using a few hours to learn and experiment. Not randomly, but with purpose. He explored different ways to make money outside of his job, freelancing, small online work, learning skills that had value in the market. At first, it felt slow and uncertain. Nothing worked immediately. There were moments where it felt like he was wasting time. But he kept going. Not because he was desperate,
but because he understood something most people ignore. Building something new always feels inefficient in the beginning.
At the same time, his relationship with money continued to evolve. He stopped seeing savings as the ultimate goal and started seeing it as a base, not a destination. Keeping money idle no longer made sense to him when he understood how inflation slowly reduces its value. So he began allocating a portion of his income into investments, not blindly chasing trends, but learning how different assets worked: stocks, index funds, even understanding risk and volatility. And this is where the psychological battle really begins. Because when you move away from safe, predictable systems into areas that involve uncertainty, your mind resists. Every drop in the market feels personal. Every mistake feels like proof that you should go back to playing it safe. But Marcus didn't panic. He expected discomfort, because he knew growth doesn't feel stable in the beginning. Another thing started changing quietly: his spending habits. Not in a restrictive way, but in a more intentional way. Before, he spent money to maintain his lifestyle. Now, he started questioning every expense based on its return. Not just financial return, but mental and long-term value. Small habits shifted. Subscriptions he didn't use got canceled. Impulse purchases became rare. Not because he was trying to save aggressively, but because he was redirecting his money toward things that could actually grow. And over time, that created a difference. Not huge at first, but noticeable.
Socially, things became more complicated. Friends started noticing that he wasn't as available as before. He skipped some outings, avoided unnecessary spending, and spent more time working on things that didn't make sense to others. And that's one of the hardest parts of stepping away from normal advice. You don't just change your finances, you change your behavior. And when your behavior changes, people react. Some don't understand it. Some think you're overthinking. Some assume you're being too extreme. And if you're not mentally strong, you go back to what's comfortable, just to fit in. Marcus felt that pressure, but he didn't let it control him. Because by this point, he had already seen enough to know that following the crowd leads to average outcomes.
If this video opened your eyes, make sure you subscribe, because what you learn today can save your future tomorrow.